In gardening, there are lots of rules that we follow that are passed down from generation to generation, and one of those rules is crop rotation. Now, that's the method of moving crops from one bed to the other to avoid the build-up of disease and pests and nutrient depletion. But I've always challenged this, and in today's episode we're going to take a look at that crop rotation and is it really necessary? I'm Tony O'Neill and this is Simplified Gardening, where I show you how to garden in a simpler way. If you want that perfect garden to relax in or just want to grow your own nutrient dense foods, then start now by clicking the subscribe button and the bell icon. Then click all to be notified each time I release new content just like this. So, is crop rotation necessary? Well, to answer that question, I had a conversation with another gardener called Gardener Scott, and he is here with me today in order to give you our views based on this subject. Hi Scott, how are you doing?
Hi Tony, I'm doing well today.
Scott, thanks for coming on the channel. So we're talking about crop rotation and is it really worth it? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think so much of what we've done has been based on how others have done it in the past. And through misinformation of that history, the industrial agriculture, monocropping, big farms, it filters down to the home gardener. And we think we have to do it the same way. And so many of the authors of gardening books over the years have been doing it this way, so we've got to do it the same way. And when it comes to crop rotation, my experience, my own research in my backyard has shown that it's not necessary. It's one of those extra added tasks. It's a labor that we force upon ourselves. Our soil doesn't need it, our plants don't need it, and we certainly don't need it if we're gardening correctly.
So we're talking about misconceptions that a lot of gardeners have around crop rotation because of farming practices and things being handed down. What are your thoughts on how and why that's happened?
Well, I think a lot of that is just because of our history of agriculture, both in the UK and in the United States. We've had a progression toward this industrial farming, and it's the monocropping. Here in the States, you can drive for miles and miles and miles and see the same crops growing. And when you do that, the soil does get depleted. And that is what most gardeners think when it comes to rotating their crops, that they have to rotate because the plant that they just had in is depleting the soil of some specific nutrients. And so they have to rotate to help the soil return to a natural state. But it doesn't work that way. What ends up happening is those nutrients are still depleted. And as we see in huge agriculture, the solution is synthetic chemical fertilizers that have to feed the plants because our soil becomes so poor. And I think a much better solution is to focus on the soil, feed the soil, have a healthy soil, and it doesn't matter what plants you're growing in that particular plot, they're going to do well.
Yeah, and I find the same thing here. We can go off in a car journey and we see all these beautiful yellow fields and they look fantastic when you see field upon field of all this yellow rapeseed, for argument's sake. And I find that you think about it, you think, right, okay, that's one massive field, 100 acres or whatever it is of one plant. And in my back of my head, it looks beautiful, but I'm thinking, what damage is that really doing to that soil there? A monoculture, it's building up all of the issues with the soil because of the microbes and everything else that are dying off there because they've used the nutrients and also bringing in those pests that are used to just that one monoculture. Do you have that same issue there?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And though my area, my region is just terrible when it comes to the soil, but we're not too far from the breadbasket of America, where we're growing the wheat and the corn by the millions of acres. And so, yes, I see that when I travel. I don't see it on a daily basis, but that's what's awakened me to the need for improving the soil, because my own garden soil is terrible. And so I have two options essentially. I can follow the practices that have been handed down, which say fertilize and throw all of those chemicals on your plants. Or I can do what I have learned and experienced, which is to feed the soil by adding organic matter back into it and then creating just the world of microorganisms within the soil, which is just so fascinating and so incredible to see the results. And so, yes, I've seen that in practice. I've had farmers in my family that have practiced that way. But on the home scale, it's just not necessary to do that. And so much more enjoyable to add the organic material right back into the soil every year.
Yeah, so there's one thing that I've always found as well, that we take what farming is doing and then we incorporate that into our gardens. And it's so crop rotation is one of those things. They designed crop rotation to prevent the buildup of pests and everything else out in the fields when they're growing all these monocrops, and we've dragged that down into our little backyards, if you like. And it's one of those things that I think is quite frustrating, especially if you're a new gardener. I'm noticing it all the time, especially as new gardeners come onto my channel.
Right.
They're telling me, it's just so complicated. And it's one of those things why I designed my channel around simplifying gardening. So
Sure.
Are you hearing the same thing from your
Oh yeah,
subscribers?
I'm a sponge. I read all the gardening books I can. I watch videos from other gardening channels. I'm trying to always suck up as much information as I can. And I found that over the years, there is no agreement when it comes to crop rotation. You have some authorities that say it's a 3-year crop rotation. And so in the first year, you're planting root crops. And then the second year in that bed, you're planting fruit crops. And then the third year in that bed, you're planting the leaf crops. And then you have someone else that says, well, in 1 year, you're supposed to grow potatoes. And then the second year, you're supposed to grow brassicas. And then you have a whole nother system that says it's a 7-year rotation and you plant by family. So you've got legumes and brassicas all interspersed with it. And so it becomes so confusing when you try to figure out just which way you're supposed to follow, because there's so much conflicting information about what crop rotation in the home garden is really all about.
And all they want to do is grow some food to eat.
Exactly. Exactly.
I find as well, going back down this sort of misconception about crop rotation, that when something is set in stone, like something like crop rotation, is passed down from generation to generation, and people are too willing to follow it because it's one of the fundamentals that we have told, well, you must do it or you're going to end up losing all your crops or all of your tomatoes or whatever it is. And because of that, if you don't rotate, you're going to pick up all this disease and your plants are going to die.
Right.
In reality, do you find that that's the case? Because I don't.
Not at all. And I think the key here, and this highlights you and me as what some call us our expert gardeners, is that we've learned that it's the practice of gardening. It's how you garden. It's developing the whole biosystem of your garden. And that's how you attack pests. And that's how you attack diseases. And that's how you improve your soil. And a big factor is mulch. Just by mulching your plants, you can keep them free of many of the soil-borne diseases that other people have because they're not mulching their plants. And so I think that's a key difference between us and a lot of beginning gardeners, is they haven't learned that yet. And that's what I try to do with my channel. I know that's what you're doing with your channel, is to try to help those beginning gardeners understand some of these concepts so that they're not led astray by misinformation, that they can develop these healthy garden systems and everything will be in balance and work out.
Yeah. It's learning to read the garden, what's going on. And I think the problem with a lot of new gardeners and some older ones as well is that
they'll go and put their plants out, they'll follow a crop rotation process, whether it's a 3, 4, 7, 10 year, whatever it is that they're doing, and they don't actually read what's happening with the plants. Or if a plant gets a pest issue, oh, it's because I didn't crop rotate, or it's because of this. And I know, like myself, you've grown lots of vegetables in the same location year after year.
Oh,
I've
sure.
grown tomatoes for 6 years in a row in my polytunnel. I've never once had blight or any other pest disease. It's about building that soil structure so that you don't need to crop rotate. But my point here, Scott, is we're now trying to explain to people, is it really necessary? And we're talking about the soil and everything else. But importantly as well, I think it's important to talk about growing in your soil constantly. What's your
Absolutely.
views on that?
Well, I grow tomatoes in the same bed every year. I've got a new house, and so I've created a whole new tomato bed that I'm planning on using again next year to grow tomatoes. And what was the first thing I did after I pulled all of the tomatoes that got zapped by a freeze recently? Well, I put in some green manure. I put in a cover crop. I've already started my winter rye seed in some of those beds that just a few weeks ago had plants in them. And I'm mulching. I actually use mulch and cover crops. I know there's a lot of people that say do one or the other, but I do both. I'll actually put in compost and mulch and seeds, and I grow my cover crops just like any other plant in my garden, so that as we move into the winter, the ground is covered. Mother Nature does not have bare soil in a healthy ecosystem. It's covered by plants or plant debris like a mulch, and that's the way I like to garden. I don't like to fight Mother Nature. I like to follow Mother Nature's guidance and try to achieve the same result.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And for those who have ever seen my channel, they know I love growing potatoes in buckets. And
And if I may say, I have said in my live stream, and I have said in one of my recent videos, I consider you an expert when it comes in to the potato growing, because I've never seen anyone able to grow as many potatoes as you in your containers.
And again, that's because I'm reading what's happening, and I'm finding. And I'll tell you why I got around that a little bit quick. We're going a little bit off topic here, but I think the story's quite relevant in the end. And that's because we're talking about pests and disease and build-up in the soil, because and the reason why we crop rotate. And what I was finding was, in my clay soil that I have here, no matter how much organic matter I put in, there is one thing that one pest that keeps coming back time and time again, and that's the slugs or wireworm, which is what we get here. And they bore holes through the potatoes and they ruin them. And I found by growing them in containers, you can read the plants better. You know when they need water or feed or anything else. But
that's a great idea.
Going back to my, I've got a lot of videos on that, but going back to the reason I mentioned it, I recently emptied all of my containers and I had a huge mound of spent compost.
Yep.
And this leads back to what you were just saying about doing various things on your garden bed. So I just harvested a whole bed full of elephant garlic, and that compost went straight on top of the mulch that was there. And
Absolutely.
then after that, I sowed a green manure, which was hairy vetch, straight into that compost. So not only has that soil now been protected by the mulch, it's been protected by the compost on top of it, and I've grown a green manure in it. So next year when I need to grow in that soil is going to be beautiful. And it's definitely not going to have any pest issues. And I could probably grow straight back garlic in it if I wanted to. Because of those successional sowings.
And I did the same thing in not growing the potatoes, but in some of my containers, that's exactly how I amended some of my beds as well, as I just dumped that soil or compost right on top of the beds, put more mulch. And it's funny you say that, because that's what I'm putting in those beds as well, different beds, but I'm putting hairy vetch seed in. So I've got the winter rye in some of my beds. I've got hairy vetch in other beds. I think they're both great cover crops and they serve different purposes. But yeah, you're exactly right. And I follow the same practice.
A lot of gardeners, they tend to garden like a monocrop. Right, I'm growing tomatoes here this year, and after the tomatoes are done, that's it.
That's
You
right.
know, they cover it over, or or they just leave it. They dig it over and leave it bare, and that's that's what we need to get away from. Because if you do growing it like a monocrop, then that's when the issue happens, because you're not giving that time to
Yeah.
continue the ground time to continue repairing itself and rebuilding those nutrients and rebuilding all the microbial life in the
Right.
soils. And
Well, and I think that's another reason why crop rotation really isn't suited for home gardens, because there's the assumption that we're growing nothing but tomatoes in a bed, and we're growing nothing but potatoes in a bed, and we're growing nothing but peppers in a bed. And so it becomes really easy to just move from one bed to another as part of a crop rotation plan. But I don't grow complete beds of carrots, and I don't grow complete beds of any single crop. And so right there, there's no reason to crop rotate, because it becomes even more confusing.
I don't know if you guys have heard about cottage gardens.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Actually, I'm
Okay.
planning on constructing a cottage garden
Okay.
within my landscape.
That idea is perfect for vegetables
Yep.
because there's so many different varieties of plants in. So it's a little bit like companion planting.
Yep.
But you're not, because you're following with successional crops as well, it's constantly changing. The microbial life is being fed. And if you were growing on a single monocrop all the time, then you're going to get the same microbial life living, but other stuff dies.
That's
But
right.
because you're changing all the time, it's bringing on all new microbial life. They die and feed others, and vice versa. So the whole cycle of the soil web life sort of continues to evolve and grow and get better and better. And that's where you build the soil. It's not that the compost that you're adding is a feed for those microbes, and it's the
Yes.
microbes that feed and provide the nutrients for your plants. And that is when you start seeing that beautiful dark brown soils.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than, you can just put your fingers in it, it's totally aerated, and you've never dug it, but you could still walk across it and it will never compact on you.
Yes.
And that's when you know you're doing some good in the garden. And you don't need to crop rotate because of that.
That's right. Yeah. The soil actually becomes better by having that diversity within a single bed.
Yeah.
That I had one bed this year, a bed that is 4 feet by 8 feet, about 1.3 by 2.5 meters, and I grew 15 different types of plants at the same time in that bed. And you can call it companion planting, you can call it square foot gardening, you can call it intensive gardening, but the concept is exactly what you pointed out. You're just growing different plants in a space because that's what you're going to use. You're using those specific plants in your kitchen, and you grow as much as you need. We don't need to think like these big agricultural farms where we're growing more than we need. We should just grow what works best for our families in our garden. Crop rotation is suitable when you're not practicing organic gardening. It's suitable when you want to use synthetic chemicals. It's suitable when you're monocropping. But all of those are things that we should not be doing in our home gardens. So if we're gardening organically and using nature to benefit us, there's absolutely no reason to rotate crops.
We have a fantastic opportunity with our gardens that farmers would wish they'd give their right arm to have, and people just don't realize it, Scott. And
That's right.
We don't need to do the things they're doing just because that's what's been done in the past. We need to stand up and say, well, look, that's what happened then. We've evolved a little bit now. We know different now.
That's right.
And this is where the education starts, where people need to learn this and try it for themselves and see those successes, and that they don't need to follow those rules.
Absolutely. Just be smart, be a smart gardener, as smart as you can be, in your own backyard or in your own allotment, and you'll have great success.
So as you can see, this is a huge topic, and Scott and I, well, we spoke for weeks on end about it, and we actually videoed over 4 hours of chat based around this conversation. So what I would suggest you do is go over to Scott's channel, because he has another version of this video. Now, usually when collaborations happen with this sort of video, they're identical videos, but Scott and my video are totally different. So make sure you get across there, because you're going to pick up even more tips based around this and more reasons why both Scott and myself think that crop rotation is just not really worth it, and it's a waste of your time. So go across there, make sure you subscribe, because you'll be doing yourself an injustice if you don't. Scott's got a fantastic channel and it's full of really useful tips and information, and I think you'll really benefit from that channel also. Now, I understand that maybe some of you will be a little bit skeptical with regards to what we've said here today, but I can guarantee you it works, and it works for lots and lots of gardeners. Now, what's your thoughts based on it? Let us know in the comments below. If you found value from this video, you can subscribe here, and when you've done that, make sure you get across and watch Scott's video right here, because that video is Scott's version of this video from lots of different conversations we've had based around this subject. I'm Tony O'Neill. This is Simplified Gardening, where I show you how to garden in a simpler way. Remember folks, you reap what you sow. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.